Which creepy urban legend turned out to be true? For the last several years in Toronto, gay men have gone missing in the village. The community was convinced it was a serial murderer on the loose, but the police said no. These murders or disappearances are unrelated to each other. Turns out that's totally the case, and the guy was unaliving gay men, dismembering them, and burying them around the properties he was working at as groundskeeper/landscaper. Story 2. Black Vulga. In the 60s and 70s, there existed an urban legend in Poland that vampires in black limousines were kidnapping people, preferring little children. It was a tale parents told their kids who would then tell their friends, etc. Turns out it was a rumor that was spread by the Polish secret police who actually used black cars to kidnap people. The aim was that no one would believe someone who would report they had witnessed a kidnapping. Story 3. I went to a university near Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. It used to be a POW camp and a military hospital before the college bought the entire property for $1 in the 60s. Since there are really only 3 universities near Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, it will not be hard to deduce which college it was. Anyway, there was a rumor that underground tunnels and all sorts of stuff was left abandoned in the abandoned sections of the college. Sure enough, it was true. We found a tunnel hatch under our carpet in our dorm room. 2 hatches on the first floor, furthest most first floor dorm room of each building. It was literally like stepping into 1945. Everything was preserved down there, and the tunnels were massive. We eventually ended up in an underground garage where there were 4 Jeeps parked, but the tires had dry rotted. We realized this was actually beneath our soccer field. Anyway, the tunnels led to the cafeteria, the admin building, every dorm, and then an old abandoned section of our campus that we had no way of entering topside. We soon realized that this was the hospital/morgue. When we got out of the tunnels and walked the floor, it was still like 1945. All the hospital beds were still there, the surgical curtains were still there, hell, even the tools, like the scalpel, saw, pliers, etc., were still on their trays. It was like everyone all of a sudden up and left and nothing had been moved since. The morgue still had its slabs, and sometimes we would dare each other to slide in there for a period of time. But yeah, it was an urban legend on campus until 3 of us decided to risk expulsion to see if it was true, and it was. This is like what I've dreamed about on a campus. I think that's so cool. An underground tunnel system that connects different buildings? I don't know, something about that just satisfies my inner child. Story 4. Out here in Washington, there were rumors of a fairy house in the woods somewhere. One park ranger decided to go hunting for it, and he actually did find a treehouse in the woods. When he looked inside, he found a ton of illicit child content. He took it down and came back a while later and found it had been put back up. They eventually found out who had been using the treehouse and arrested him. Story 5. Cropsey. Sort of like the boogeyman of Staten Island. During the 70s and 80s, kids on the island would go missing, and the urban legend would attribute it to Cropsey. As it turned out, there really was a crazy kidnapper and serial murderer who was responsible. He was caught and convicted. There is a great documentary about it. Used to be on Netflix, not sure if it still is, called Cropsey. Check it out if you get a chance. Story 6. When I was a kid, my dad would take me and my brother to High Rock. It's a neat overlook and we would play on the rocks. It was fun, but also a little sobering, as much as things can be for kids, because a girl had died in a hang gliding accident if I remember right. As you drive up to the parking lot for the overlook, the road continues on into the woods. We asked our dad where it went, and he told us that you would be driving down the road and suddenly armed guards would pop out of the woods to stop you because there was a secret government base there. That's the case, except it wasn't really secret. It's Raven Rock, which is a nuclear bunker that can act as a remote Pentagon if the country is attacked. Cheney went there during September 11th, while Bush was taken somewhere else. You will be detained if you trespass on the property. I went back to High Rock a few years ago while visiting family, and while hanging out at the overlook, a truck of teenagers showed up. They asked if I knew what was up the access road, and I told them Raven Rock, and to not keep going because they would be detained. They decided they wanted to check it out anyway. An hour later, when I had left High Rock, those kids had not come back yet, so I figured they were getting their butts chewed out by a soldier. Fun fact, Raven Rock is the headquarters of the Enclave in Fallout 3. Story 7. This is, thankfully, a somewhat more lighthearted urban legend than a lot of the ones here. So I'd heard several times from friends and whatnot hearsay tales about this creepy, near-mythical shoe licker who resided in the Tampa area. Apparently this dude would walk up to people in public spaces and ask them about their shoes, and then would ask to see the bottoms of them, and would then drop and do his best to lick the bottoms of the shoes before the person could step back down. Naturally, I thought this was just way too weird. There was no way this wasn't just people making up some BS story. Then, I ran into the guy at a taco truck. Skinny dude, longish hair, probably homeless from how he was dressed. Could have been 18, could have been 30. Walks up as I'm waiting for what turns out to be the best taco I've ever had in my existence, and asks about the shoes I'm wearing. I had just finished performing and was still wearing some Doc Marten boots, and was more than a little soused. He asks if he can see the treads or something like that, and I'm all confused, and I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And he drops to the floor, grabs my boot, and starts licking away at the sole. I yelled at the dude, sort of kicked at him, and he scampers off. Weirdest frickin' interaction ever. Yeah, that's a weird one. Definitely peak urban legend, though. It's like you're talking to a friend and you're like, you would not believe who I met downtown. The shoe licker. And then inevitably the friend is like, what's the shoe licker? And then you go through the story. And then the friend is like, no way. But like maybe they tell it to their friends, or maybe they have it happen to them. And then it spreads like wildfire. And soon everyone is talking about the shoe licker. On a slightly creepier note, though, it's probably, well, definitely a frisky thing for him. So that makes it kind of weird, which is unfortunate. Weirder than it is, I mean. Story 8. We had an older couple that would come into the store I worked at when I was 15. They clearly had mental development/mental health problems, and the rumor was that they were siblings, and the 2 teenage girls with them were their children. About 5 years later, I would find out someone had called the state about them, and it turns out, from what I remember, to be mostly true. The parents were apparently the result of interfamilial relations, and they carried on the family tradition, as it were. I think the state removed their daughters and put them in state custody since they weren't able to take care of themselves, and I don't remember what happened to the parents. Story 9. There were abandoned tunnels below my town. A large part used to be a self-sustaining mental institution covering several square miles. Everyone talked about them, but no one ever talked about actually being in them. Went spelunking in the woods and found an old maintenance shack. There was a basement that was flooded. Went back a couple years later when there was a bad drought. Basement had a rusted door leading into said tunnels. Nothing special and no escaped crazy people. Story 10. Freddy Krueger is based on a real story. Hear me out. There's a small ethnic group local to Southeast Asia, the Hmong people. They've been oppressed for years by various countries, so they fought with the US during the Vietnam Civil War. As you know, we lost, and the North Vietnamese were gearing up to unalive the Hmong people who had fought for the Southern Vietnamese. So the US airlifted a bunch of Hmong families to the US, primarily in California and Minnesota. One of the recent immigrants was a young man. He was perfectly healthy but suddenly died in his sleep. No one knew how he died. It's guessed it was a heart attack, but an autopsy wasn't done. This sent a panic throughout the community. There is a Hmong legend of a spirit that enters your dreams and unalives you. Hmong people were terrified. They were also in a new community without access to some old traditions to protect them. Young men started staying awake trying to avoid the monster. They downed caffeine, and they were actually scared enough that it caused stress to their hearts, and they died. Eventually, 117 men died from the Hmong sleeping sickness. Dying from what essentially is sleep deprivation is actually a big fear of mine, even though it's almost completely controllable. But it just seems like a terrible way to go. You just devolve into full-on psychosis until you die. Definitely not my preferred way to go. Also, my apologies for the pronunciation of the name of the ethnic group. I am unfamiliar and I don't know how to pronounce it properly, so I hope I did at least okay. Story 11. Not creepy, but in my small rural hometown, there was a rumor that a bunch of city officials, cops, teachers, business owners, etc., basically anyone a kid would see as an authority figure, had massive bang parties. Obviously, as you grew up, you came into your senses. Until one year when a teacher's husband stomped the absolute crap out of a local business owner in broad daylight. Turns out the legend wasn't just a legend. His wife was apparently a member of what was called the Hot Tub Club, and he wasn't invited. A good chunk of local leaders got outed as hosting group banging parties somewhat regularly. I'm more surprised it was kept secret as long as it was. Okay, I gotta say it reflects kind of poorly on the wife for being invited to these things and presumably still going. Or else the husband wouldn't have had a real problem to be, like, mad about it, you know? That's just a bad look. Can you imagine she's just like, oh, but it's tradition, honey, it's fine. You go there, you bang a few people, you leave, it's whatever. I would not even know how to respond. Story 12. The Asylum lake tunnels in Kalamazoo are real. There is a small lake and wildlife area just off of WMU's campus, and for a long time there were rumors going around that they were still there and accessible. Well, turns out that it was true, and there was an old set of stairs that was partially buried that led to a walled-up tunnel entrance. A few people used hand tools and ended up breaking part of the wall down, and got inside only to find the tunnels fully intact, albeit a bit damp and murky. Somehow the authorities got wind and went and sealed the entrance again, but it's still very obvious where that was if you were really looking for them. Story 13. There's an urban legend about a thief stealing a suitcase containing a dead dog. In the 70s, my crazy artist aunt and uncle lived in Manhattan, and their German shepherd died. Having the city come dispose of the dog was expensive. Lugging it up to animal control in the Bronx was cheaper, so they folded up the 50-pound dog into a suitcase and headed for the subway. Except my uncle set down the heavy suitcase at a crosswalk while they waited for the light, and a couple of kids ran by and snatched it. My uncle gave chase, but obese alcoholics don't get far in New York in the summer. For years they laughed, speculating what those kids said when they opened the luggage. And I wonder again and again, were they the source of that tale? Surely I can't imagine this happening more than once, right? Unless a lot of people decide to shove dead dogs into suitcases. I don't know, it sounds more likely than not that this is the origin of the story. If so, that's really cool, OP. Story 14. I live near a lake and there was an urban legend that there were huge lake monsters near the hydroelectric dam. Most people thought it was just some fishermen's tall tales. We all guessed it was just a twist on the classic, the one that got away. Turns out divers went into the water behind the dam for a routine inspection to see if there was any damage after months of heavy flooding in the area. Apparently, one of the divers got too close to what he originally thought was a large moss-covered rock/boulder, until it moved and tried to latch onto the diver's arm. Apparently, there are 200+ pound catfish behind the dam, which thrive on the dead fish that go through the hydroelectric portion of the dam. The agitated water makes it easier for the large catfish to breathe and grow past what is commonly found in the area. And the lack of fishers, as all commercial fishing is banned for at least 1,000 meters, means these fish are truly free to grow to enormous sizes. Story 15. There was an urban legend at my high school that one of the janitors quit because he saw a set of bloody footprints down the hallway. My bad. That was me. One day I was staying late to complete a class project and dropped a heavy glass pane on my toe. It left a huge gash that I couldn't get to stop bleeding. Now, my school was the kind of place where having a shoe full of blood would get you a week's detention instead of a hospital visit, so I make sure to check around before I limped on home to bandage myself up. Our high school was a rectangle with a sunken library in the middle, so we had hallways that framed it. I was at one corner, and at the other end was the janitor finishing up mopping the hallway. As he turned the corner, I took off my shoes and socks since they were so full of blood I couldn't properly walk, and walked down the hallway and out the door. This left a perfect trail of bloody footprints all the way until the hallway dried out, which happened to be exactly where the exit door was. As the rest of the story goes, he turned around and when he heard the door close, found a trail of bloody footprints down the hallway, with no one there to take responsibility. Dude quit on the spot. Sorry to freak you out, janitor. Ghosts aren't real, or at least don't do that. OP, you created a truly horrifying scene for this janitor who's already probably a little freaked out cleaning at night. This poor guy had to find a new job because of you. That is a top-tier story, though. Being the source of an urban legend is pretty fun. Story 16. Welcome to the World of AIDS is an urban legend about a man meeting a woman at a bar, going back to his place to sleep together, only to have him wake up to her being gone, and the famous slogan, "Welcome to the World of AIDS," written on his bathroom mirror. The urban legend has many different variations. It was just a parable about casual banging and risk. This was largely considered an urban legend. That is, until stealth pausing actually turned out to be a very real thing. Modern actual cases involve a British man named Daryl Rowe, who, already knowing he had HIV, would send a text after banging to his many victims, saying things like, "I have HIV, LOL, oops," and "I'm riddled." Others have also been convicted for knowingly doing this on Craigslist. Story 17. Where I live, there was a legend about a child and pet-eating monster on the east side of town. We called it the Beast from the East. One child was reported missing, and multiple pets were as well. There was even a mangled-up deer found just out on the train tracks in that area, and the trains no longer used that track / it was blocked off, so a train could not have run over the deer. There were coyotes out in the woods around town, some lynx, and maybe even wolverines. So most people assumed those animals were coming into town to follow the deer that would herd there every fall / spring, and just pick off pets because they were easy prey if not fenced in properly. Well, a few years ago, a trapper set up their traps to possibly catch some of these animals for fur, and to help reduce the amount of missing pets. He ended up snaring a mountain lion. Mountain lions should not exist this far east in Canada, as they are considered extinct on the eastern side of Canada, and we are only a few hundred, maybe 200 to 300 miles from Manitoba. Most lions stick close to the Alberta side if they are anywhere in Saskatchewan, so the beast from the east was real, although it was just an elusive big cat. We knew there was an actual monster living near town, even though law enforcement / the forest rangers kept saying otherwise. Story 18. My girlfriend grew up in a village in Italy, and she remembered her dad telling her scary stories about spies who infiltrated the village during World War II and kidnapped naughty girls who didn't go to sleep. She thought it was just a scary story he told her, but she found out that during World War II, there were actually people who snuck into the village, kidnapped a girl, and executed her near the river. She was apparently the daughter of a politician who was staying in the village for safety with her grandmother and mother. The people, or spies, who came to kidnap her disappeared, and nobody knew who they were or why they unalived a little girl. Story 19. In my city neighborhood when I was a kid, there was the murderer clown. He was located generally daily above the elementary school grounds, on a giant field with soccer areas and a hill on the side. Well, I went up there one day as a kid, and there he was, swinging in a swing at the top of the side hill. We stared at him for a bit and then ran for our lives when he got off the swing and started running towards us. One day, I remember walking by one of the play areas and there was a line of cop cars parked on this gravel rock hill road going up to the field. I think we all just assumed he was arrested. What OP didn't say is if there were actually any murders or anything. So far, it just seems like a creepy clown, who probably liked little kids a little too much. But no murder like the title suggests. Still, it seems like he was dealt with, so that's probably for the best. Story 20. In the small town I'm from, there was this one homeless guy. He technically lived with his mother, but wasn't there much. His nickname was Sweet Pea. He was a big dude and, of course, developmentally disabled. He used to wander the town at night. Totally harmless, but there's always that, better watch it or Sweet Pea will get you. Well, while he was wandering, he used to go around to all the gas stations and collect the little last bit of oil in all of the oil cans in the trash. Everyone joked that he was actually rich from selling that oil. Well, when his mom died, they went to go clean out her house. He had 10 55-gallon drums of oil in his garage. He was selling it, and that's how they survived financially. This one is actually kinda sweet, except for the fact that it's talking about a developmentally challenged, destitute person. That's unfortunate and makes my heart hurt, but the rest of it's kind of sweet. The fact that the joke that he was selling the oil and getting rich was actually kind of true, and the fact that he was working hard. The situation in life is unfortunate, but it sounds like he was doing at least okay for himself. Story 21. I went to school in a very well-to-do area, so of course there was nothing seriously wrong like murderers or assaulters. But one story from elementary school stands out. There were rumors that our school had a basement under the gym floor that contained torture equipment. People described it as racks, whips, chains, etc. This was, of course, denied by absolutely everyone at the school and, of course, parents. Besides, our single-story school was built in the 1920s. How could it possibly have a basement? Kids, of course, doubted the denial. If you jumped pretty hard on the gym floor, it sounded hollow. When I was in 5th grade, someone bought a disposable camera and snuck away to the gym when nobody was using it during the lunch break. This was in the 90s, so not much teacher supervision. A week later, he came back with the developed photos. They were really blurry, grainy, and not good at all because he was 10, but still good enough. What we saw was actually shocking. The legends were true. There was a basement under the gym floor. Inside the gym storage room, there was a door to a boiler room. And inside the boiler room, there was a staircase that led to a basement. Inside the basement, there was what appeared to us kids at least to be torture equipment. There were whips, chains, racks, etc. just as described. The kid showed his parents, who of course brought the photos to the school staff demanding to know what the deal was. The photos of course weren't good enough quality to see what the stuff actually was, so there were questions. The staff investigated and eventually brought us all into the gym for an assembly about the photos, which at this point we had all either seen or were told about by other people. The school basement was storage from when the building used to be the city's high school for more than 40 years. The school used to use weight benches, which explains the racks, for the sports teams. The school also had a very successful equestrian team, who would go to competitions. There used to be a horse barn on the property, but it had been torn down. This explained the whips, ropes, and the saddles and other horse equipment. They showed us some of the stuff that was down there, and then all the rumors were put to rest. but the legend of the elementary school's dungeon cemented itself in the school's history. That kid who went down there has balls of steel. I would never. As a kid, now, no, absolutely not. Through a boiler room to a random room that I think is a torture dungeon? Are you crazy? This kid has a journalistic future if they're not already there by now. I guess if it was the 90s, yeah, they could be a full-fledged journalist, and they should be. That is truly impressive for a kid. Hell, even for an adult, I would be freaked out, as I said. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed and were at least a little spooked by some creepy urban legends. If you have any of your own, make sure to leave them in the comments. Hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.